Good morning. This is Jim Campanini. I'm the editor of The Sun, and welcome to this morning's discussion. It's going to be more of a forum rather than a debate at today's Sun for the candidates in the first Middlesex Senate race. This is Eileen Donoghue and Chris Doherty. They're with us this morning, and I appreciate them showing up so early after last night's debate, which was held at the Neshoba Valley Technical Regional School. You can watch that debate on lowellsun.com website. It's already posted. It was a live debate last night, very spirited. I thought it went well. There were over about 125 to 150 people showed up on a school night, which I think was very good. The districts served in this race is Lowell, Dunstable, Groton, Pepperell, Tingsboro, and Westford. Like I said, we had the debate last night. Michael Goldman moderated, did a very good job. The candidates expressed a lot of opinions and stances on a whole range of issues, and I think it would be worth your while to go and watch that debate. We're going to have some follow-up questions, but like I said, this will be more of a discussion. I will limit the candidates' responses if we go on to if we want to get on to other things, but most of the time will just be a discussion. And the first question I have, which came across last night, I thought last night's debate was a lot of Lowell-centric topics, so I had a lot of applications to Lowell. So what I want to ask both of you, and we'll start with Eileen, how is this not a Lowell-centric race?
Well, I mean, I think every community in the first Middlesex district not only is involved, but has been greatly affected by what's going on in the state and the Commonwealth as a whole. So, you know, some of the topics that I think we discussed in at least from my perspective, jobs in the economy and education apply all across the board. I don't think it's limited to Lowell. I think it applies in every single town. And as I'm going around talking to people, you know, that's where it's at. People are concerned about the economy. They're concerned about jobs. And, you know, when you talk about education, I don't think there's a community, and in particular the towns, that isn't right up there on their list. You know, what's happening with education, the funding formulas, are they being fairly treated by the Commonwealth in terms of their schools? I mean, every district wants to maintain excellence in terms of they're very proud of their education and of their schools. And so I think the topics do apply to every single community, and that's what it has to be today. You know, the first Middlesex district, I look at it as a large community, a diverse community, but a large community. And, you know, as a state senator, you're going to have to represent every corner of the community with whatever their particular needs are. But right now, I think there's some common needs.
I mean, I think, you know, as I've traveled throughout the first Middlesex district, you look at the town of Tingsboro that's desperately crying for greater infrastructure so they can expand businesses and opportunities there. You talk about Pepperell, where there's a mill in the middle of the community that they want to redevelop. You look at Groton and Dunstable that had challenges with an override and they're trying to fund their schools. It's the same with Westford, and they're all struggling with school challenges. How do we pay for them? We face serious issues right now as a state where there's questions about taxes and how do we go forward, cuts that are going to have to come. And these suburbs are the ones that in particular are saying, we need help. We need help because what you do with your tax rate and how it gets impacted will impact them. They'll either on the local level have to make adjustments or they're seeing significant cuts. So I think that going around to those districts, they want a voice and they need a voice now more than ever.
You know, last night it didn't come up, but there have been regionalization efforts in areas. We do have regional schools. There are whole districts that are doing 911 regional centers to cut down on dispatching. Is that possible to connect in this district? And you're talking with people in the suburbs. Is that something that is on their mind, regionalization efforts for public services at all?
You know, I haven't heard that in particular in the towns. You know, let's take, you know, for instance, fire and protection, which is a big issue. Every town has their own. Some have volunteer fire departments right now, and you know, and I was struck being in Pepperell on Saturday, Groton on Saturday when they had a fireman's muster and a parade of all of the towns and all of the equipment. And in talking to people throughout the day in the parade, you know, a lot of people feel very strongly that they need local protection because of the size of their community, because of, you know, making sure that if there is a fire, that there's someone right there, not coming from, you know, 25 miles away, but someone there to protect them. So there's a huge need, I think, and a feel on a local level to have local control, to have local services, both police and fire. I think where we can, you know, do a better job and need to do a better job is particularly in some of the economic development incentives and issues on a regional basis. That doesn't require a community, you know, to dismantle their current, you know, municipal services. But what it does do, and I know we saw this when we created the Merrimack Valley Economic Development Council, it gives you a bird's eye view of what projects are coming to the particular area. And I think we need to do more of that. I think the city and the towns need to cooperate and communicate more. So for instance, if there's a project, an employer or someone looking for development in Westford, and for whatever reason there's not a good fit, maybe there is a good fit in Tingsboro. Maybe there is a good fit in Lowell. Maybe there's some kind of communication. And I think that is the area that needs more communication, more regionalization in terms of approach. One, to attract employers, two, to develop jobs, because, you know, that's essential. You know, some of the towns are very, you know, protective of keeping their small town feel. And so some of them don't want big commercial developments coming in. And so you can be in a town, and on one side of the street there's commercial development, and that's that town. The other side, it's a small town that they don't have the commercial development because they don't want it. And so I think there's a need to communicate better, and I think it will benefit the whole district if we do.
It's actually been a big issue, and it's come up actually very frequently in the suburbs, particularly as it relates to fire. And I'll give you a specific example. You know, the town of Dunstable, they actually had shared dispatchers in the past, and they have been part of this model. And they realized that it didn't work for a couple of reasons. If the dispatcher is not in your community, they may not know the local roads of the area as well, and so it has an impact on them. Sometimes response times can be different if you don't have the resources available right in your community at that time. And so you could impact public safety in a way that could be to our detriment. And, you know, it's one thing to cut corners, and it's another thing to make sure that you keep the community safe. As we talk about public safety, bringing them together. And hey, look, we had county government. We've been there before, and there's a reason that it was dismantled, because people thought it was overburdensome and it didn't work. But it's a big issue for these communities. It's a big issue for the fire departments, because there's legislation pending on the table right now that's been put forth in the legislature, and so they have cares and concerns about this. We need to have greater cooperation, and I did this in the Middlesex DA's office. We brought together police chiefs from throughout Middlesex County. We were the first time we did that, and we met with them and we talked about how do you share resources, how do you make sure you're addressing the issues that each community has, how do you talk about making sure that technology can be synergistic so they can work together and cooperate in a more efficient manner. And we did that with superintendents of schools. We brought together all 54 superintendents on a monthly meeting where we met with them and we talked about these same things and how can we share resources for schools. So there are ways that you can do it without mandating it, but you have to be very careful when you come to public safety, because at the end of the day, if you're talking about police and fire, you want to make sure that there's someone who can respond in a timely manner and that the people know the area well.
Okay, lately in the news we've seen what happened with Lawrence, okay, where they've been giving a loan from the state legislature, okay, for $35 million, and then it necessitated cutting a lot of firefighters and public safety workers. They've had to rely on mutual aid from outside communities, including Lowell, Drake, Tingsboro, some other communities in this district who have finally said, hey, we can't keep doing this anymore because it's putting our own towns in jeopardy. But yet at the same time, myself as an editorial writer, I see, you know what, there is a certain value in mutual aid, okay? We can do it if we have to. And I said, if you subscribe to that view, the regionalization, it might be a cost savings in the end. It might be worthwhile. But if you were a state senator, I mean, and you're looking for cost savings at the same time to do public safety more rationally, is this something that we have to look at? I mean, 50 years, 100 years from today, there might be regional fire departments and police departments. And I think that the main thing we have to work on is just the responses and who is in charge of what. But we've got 351 communities. And like the old Red Sox used to say, there used to be 24 different cabs taking them up to the ballpark. I mean, it just seems that this isn't the way that we want to go down, continue.
Well, I think the Lawrence example is a good one, because I know we struggled with this on the council. Fire departments, it's a brotherhood, and you'll hear that they are there to help each other. And so they're big supporters of mutual aid and stepping in and helping another department in need. But what we're seeing in Lawrence is basically, are they balancing their budget by making it be a budgetary impact and item on another community? For example, we had a streak where we were giving mutual aid to, and it was Lawrence again back in several years ago. And one of the concerns that you have is, and it's all well and good to use your department to help another town in a pinch, in a crisis, but as part of the regular budgeting, what's going to prevent any town from saying, hey, we can cut this department because we'll get aid if we need it from someone else. So that's unfair. And then the other problem is if, God forbid, one of the firefighters or someone who's responding is injured or worse, that burden and that expense goes back to the original town or city from which he or she came. It is not shared by Lawrence in this case. So, the people who are making decisions have to really look at this and say, is this mutual aid or is this an abuse of mutual aid? And I think on the short term, that's what all of the communities are going to have to take into account. Look, Lawrence, woke up one morning and said, we're missing $35 million. We don't know how this happened. Can we get a loan? At the same time, they were suggesting, I believe, that this would prevent them from making drastic cuts to their public safety, including fire. And then they found they had to do it anyway and still, take the loan. That's a very bad situation. And as a state senator, though, as a state senator, you're not going to make the decisions in Lawrence City Hall, but you will make decisions as to the effort and requests that are coming to the State House. And I think that decision should be that there's got to be some oversight and some control.
Okay. That was going to be a follow-up question. But on the regionalization effort, what do you think? Is that in our future?
Well, I mean, it may very well be in our future. I mean, we're facing the worst economic crisis in a century. And so we need to try to find innovative ways to do it. But you can't do things in a way as it relates to public safety that's going to impact it. We've gone this way before. That's what county government was about. And people felt like there was an additional bureaucracy that was created as a result of this. So it's probably not the most effective way. People can talk about regionalization on the one hand, but at the back end, when something is happening in your community, if you're in Lowell or in the surrounding suburbs, Westford, Tingsboro, Groton, and Dunstable, you want to make sure a police officer shows up in a timely manner. You don't want to be waiting because there's a regionalization strategy that's been put in place. If there's a fire in your house, it's all great to talk about regionalization, but you want somebody to show up right away. And so what you do is you need, if there's any model that's put in place, you'd have to make sure that you are protecting those core areas. And I don't think we've been able to find a way to do that any better than the way we're doing it now. Because the reason that you have local police officers is because the issues are local and you need to respond in a timely manner. I mean, you're talking about situations where a lot of these things are life and death. You want, seconds, minutes can make a difference in somebody's life. It can make an impact on what happens to a situation that could be hostile. Think about downtown Lowell. A couple of weeks ago, we had somebody on top of a building with a firearm and wound up shooting themselves. I mean, we want to make sure that the police are there right away. Not only was he a threat to himself, he was a threat to downtown residents like me and everybody else who lived there. And so, at the end of the day, it's okay to talk about regionalization in theory, but we got to make sure that our core public safety is intact.
Okay, this question goes to you first. The legislature voted, to give Lawrence that $35 million loan, but the state is on the hook for the payback if they can't make the payments on that loan. At the same time, there was an argument whether they should have the Financial Control Board, which was in Lowell in the early 1990s and basically helped to straighten us out during the financial distress. Now, as a state senator, would you have approved, that vote to give them that loan without financial authority, financial board oversight?
Well, I think the actual legislation that was put in place didn't give them the loan. it gave Lawrence the authority to apply for the loan.
Right.
That was the first step, because they required it. And I think at the end of the day, having oversight of all state money that goes out, there should be a mechanism that's in place for that. But at the same time, if you're going to elect a mayor and you're going to elect a city council, well, you want to make sure that they're doing their job, because we're paying them a lot of money to do it. And so you want to have some oversight, but at the end of the day, why do we have this process in place if we're not trusting city council or mayors to do their job they're meant to do? And that's the problem that we see right now in the community of Lawrence. And it's bigger than that. You can't just blame, you just can't blame the leadership. There's a real challenge there. Lawrence is it's the poorest community in Massachusetts, one of the poorest in the country. They're struggling to find jobs for those people, and it's a real significant
But that's
problem.
why I think they need the oversight. They don't have the tools. I mean, look what happened in Springfield. Where they were in they were in a desperate situation just like Lawrence is, and the Financial Control Board was there for 5 years before it finally gave back the town with an $85 million surplus. Sometimes the politics from electing these people just influences them from making the hard decisions. I mean,
I think there absolutely has to be a control board. You're correct. Lowell had a control board in the early 90s when Lowell, at that point, was, I think, $12 or $13 million in the red and had to apply for a loan. This is more severe from what we've seen. And the control board was a good thing. I mean, maybe locally people resisted it and they bristle at the fact that some people are coming in and putting systems in place. But when all was said and done, there were systems in place that made it a stronger, healthier administration. You do not shut out the mayor, you do not shut out the council. There's representatives on the control board. So there's a continual communication involvement. But, when you're in the ditch, you need someone to bail you out. You're going to have to go by some rules so that you don't drive right back into the ditch. I think a control board should be in place. I don't think it's a criticism of the city or the administration. In fact, the administration was brand new when this problem came to light. But you do not wake up and find yourself $30 million in the red overnight. That doesn't happen in a well-managed government. And so, though the mayor's new and some of the councilors were new, the systems were already in place, and they're still dealing with those same systems. And I absolutely think it would be good for the city of Lawrence. I think it was good for the city of Springfield when they were in such dire straits. It does give discipline, it does give oversight, and it's not a punishment. It's really a way of making sure they can get their house in order and proceed and go forward and be stronger because of it. And as a senator, I think you have a responsibility to the taxpayers for those dollars that are going out the door. I absolutely think you have to help cities in that condition, whether it's a Lawrence or a Holyoke or a Springfield, and all the cities are struggling. But you also have to make certain that you're not just throwing money out the window, and that it's being spent wisely, and that they're taking the measure so that it doesn't happen again.
quick follow-up?
I mean, I agree with all that, but the problem is bigger than that. I mean, we're talking about questions of, money management and oversight in the community when there are a lot of people there who are hired to do that and to handle that. And so I think that, this is $35 million, but we're talking about a budget in Lawrence that far exceeds that. And so I think that we've got to make sure that all monies that are spent, we're doing in a controlled way. But it's also, it's up to their people to make decisions about their elected officials to make sure that they're electing people. In this case, they have a mayor who's a brand new mayor, and they put a new management in place. But at the end of the day, people are counting on their elected officials to do the right job, to be competent when they get these jobs, to be professionals, and to make the types of decisions that are going to be right for them. I've talked about this in this race, in the city of Lowell. We've reviewed the documents of the Department of Revenue, and they come in and they talk about systematic errors, and we've had them in this community, and they happen in other communities. But you want to depend upon your elected officials to do the job they're elected to do. Otherwise, why are we hiring them? Why are we paying these people? And I think that's what the issue is at the end of the day. Of course, we want to have oversight and management, but we can do that again and again and again. But I think at the end of the day, you want to elect people who are competent to do the job, are professional, and are doing the job right.
Well, I can make a prediction that over the next 2 years, things are going to get even tougher, okay? And there was a community in Massachusetts, and I think it was Dighton, or I don't want to use the wrong community, that actually appealed to the state to have them take them over. They were running the community into the ground on purpose because they figured the only way they were going to get out of this mess was the state to take them over. I think you might see more situations like that. So not to belabor the point, but you might be asked,
That's right.
okay, to step in 3 or 4 times, and there's going to be a decision as a state senator you're going to have to face and say, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Do we reward irresponsible management by saying the state's going to give everybody a loan? Or do we say, hey, the Financial Control Board is going to come in there
Yeah.
and take you over and try to get you back on the feet?
I mean, what happened in Lawrence is not your usual course of business. It doesn't happen, city governments don't operate that way. You don't,
Would
they
hope so,
needed
right?
the money to make their budget, to make their payroll. That's how badly managed this
Mhm.
was. That is not, an ordinary occurrence. And they came to the state and said, hey, we need access to money to get this done. That's why I'm saying I support control board. It was an extraordinary situation. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. It's tough to manage budgets, there's no question about it, but to get that far in the red and not have any red flag go up, and then there's no and then to have the drastic layoffs that they've taken after they had access to the money, and putting the city at risk, having just a handful of firefighters on any shift. There are red flags all over this, and there's no indication whatsoever that they've got, their wheels back on track at all.
All right, let's hope they can turn things around. What surprised me last night, I learned a few things from that debate last night. I thought I knew everything. I don't. I was kind of surprised that both of you opposed the MCAS as a graduation requirement. And yet, both of you are in agreement that Massachusetts is #1 in the nation in most testing categories, which was basically brought on because of 1993 education reform, which set up MCAS as a high-stakes test. So explain to me, both of you, why you are opposed to MCAS as a graduation requirement, and if that is eradicated, what do we do for accountability measures in this state? Chris, we'll start with you.
My answer to the question is that MCAS shouldn't be the only requirement as it comes to graduation. I believe that there are categories of sub-students where you need to have exemptions for them. Some of them are in place, but I think there are other students that, quite frankly, schools are asking themselves, how do we handle these kids? And I know this, and I hear about this quite frequently. You're getting married to someone who's a teacher, for the challenges that they face. I think what we have to do is we have to have a standard, and I think MCAS does that. But to be the only criteria for every student is unfair. There are other gifts and skills that people have in this society, and we know that. And there are standardized tests. They were the Iowa test when you go to, when you go to law school or grad school. There are GREs and LSATs. Not everybody is good at standardized tests, but it means that they have other skills, they have other abilities. So I think MCAS is one standard, but it shouldn't be the only standards. There should be some exemptions in place for students who are trying to figure out how do we handle it if they're not capable of passing the MCAS.
Yeah, MCAS, I'm, having chaired the school committee, I'm familiar with the impact of MCAS, and I think standards and accountability are good, and they're here to stay, and they should be. The problem with MCAS is this, and I saw it when we would get our results on an annual basis from the state. There are a large contingent of students. Everybody takes the same, MCAS, and let's say we have in the city a very large special education number of students. They most times don't fare well on these tests, and they don't pass. They go to school. They have their own challenges. But they're not going to get a diploma, and because of what MCAS does today. That's wrong. There are students who English is not their first language. They take the test in English. They may have other measures to show that they, do their work well, they score well in tests in school. There are other things that can be taken into account. But because of, and if you look at some of the questions in MCAS, and if this is not your first language, I defy anybody, try another language and see if you could pass this test if that's not your first language. And so those students are not going to get a diploma. What happens? A lot of them drop out. I mean, it is a factor that a lot of them will just say, well, if I'm not going to get a diploma, and I know, I can't score well on this one standardized test. So that doesn't mean we take away the standards of MCAS. And I think Common Core is going to give us, at least once they write the standards, we're not compromising, or I hope, we're not compromising the high standards that MCAS has given us. But it is going to give some flexibility so that the schools can look to, and they can look to certain students that will probably never pass MCAS. And why should they be treated in a way that though they've gone to 4 years of school, they can never get a diploma? That will adversely impact that student the rest of their life. And that's the problem I have with it. Not for your average, but there are certain exceptions. And I think MCAS is so rigid, and that requirement is so rigid that it carves out no exceptions.
I'm like a junkyard dog on this issue, okay? Because
Did you take the MCAS test?
I did when it first came out. I think I got 17 on it. But here's the point: we have spent and committed $90 billion since 1993 into this educational system, and we have received results. Now, MCAS was to spot and identify where there are deficiencies, not only in students, but also in the classroom, and then redeploy those dollars. The unions have put up resistance, okay? And I'm not saying whether it's good or bad. I think overall it is bad because they put up resistance to give superintendents the control to redeploy. We've got failing schools, to put the best teachers in failing schools. A teacher has the right not to be transferred. Well, the new law says that a superintendent can't transfer that student. We talk about special education. Some of those students might not graduate anyway under the old model, but at least we are giving them a threshold to shoot for. And I just think personally that standards are good, thresholds being set are good, so you try to apply yourself to reach some goals, or at least some achievements. And I mean, the second part of this question, okay, then how do we measure accountability both in the classroom and for our dollars that we're pouring into the school system? If we do away with MCAS or diminish to say, okay, we're going to put a portfolio. Everybody can put together a portfolio, all right? And then won't we still have the same problem? Because if you do have academics saying, gee, I don't think that portfolio meets the standard. Should every kid graduate?
Well, I think that, I think having standards is important, and I think MCAS is important. But the question is, what do you do with those students who at the end of the day aren't going to pass the MCAS test? What do you do with them? Do you just never let them graduate, or is there some other mechanism, and why are they failing? And that's the issue that I want to make sure that we're addressing. And I think, look, in classrooms you have to listen to teachers because they're on the front lines of this, and they're dealing with more than just educating kids today. I mean, there's violence in schools that they're dealing with, there's bullying in schools that are happening on a daily basis, there's drugs and alcohol challenges, so they're playing many different roles of just beyond educating students. But we have to listen to them about what the challenges are that they're facing. And I think that there are systems that are in place where there are reviews of, our teachers doing a competent job in the classroom. We should be rewarding behavior for innovation in the teachers that are really inspiring in the classroom. We should put them up as models for the school systems so that other teachers can say, why is this working? Why are the students responding to this method of teaching besides other methods of teaching?
Are you in favor of merit pay for teachers?
I think that merit pay is important for teachers. I think, I think in some, we'd have to say how we would set that forth, but I think in some circumstances that would work, yes. I think there are awards and bonuses you can give to teachers that are exceptional and going above the line. But I think at the end of the day, what we need to make sure that we're doing is that the test isn't hindering those other aspects of teaching, where there can be innovation in the classroom, where the teachers can feel like that they can really inspire these students. And so you have to have this balance. So I think MCAS and standards are important, but yet, what are we going to do? I mean, it's one thing to say the test, but what do we do with these kids who aren't able to pass it? And we can't just say, well, you didn't pass the test. We have
It's only one
systems in place.
test.
Accountability.
It's only one test.
But accountability.
No, we got to maintain the standard, and that's what I think. I believe you maintain the high standards, you maintain accountability, but there are certain categories. It's only one test. So let's go to that special education student who goes to school day in and day out, year in and year out, does well on his or her test, participates in the class by any traditional measure, gets good grades from it, but can't take a standardized test because of their particular learning disability. You're preventing that kid from ever getting a diploma. Now there's got to be a fairness about this, and MCAS that graduation requirement is so rigid. I am not saying in any way
Will
to
you
get...
take on the State Department of Education and set up some category that those kids do achieve some level?
And that's what Common Core is proposing, is to treat, and so when you say MCAS as a graduation requirement. Common Core is going to give more flexibility so that there are certain categories that they can assess and come up with a score that maybe is different than just MCAS. It's only that one test. Now, I think you're right as far as accountability. There is a huge investment that's been made in education, and you have to make sure that the dollars are reaching their target, that we're getting where we have to get. One of the challenges, however, is the issue of failing schools. There are schools that, whether it's management, whether it's teachers, whether it's the students, the community, a combination of all, that they're not doing well. My concern about the turnaround or punishing that school is you're going to drive good teachers away from those schools. They're going to say, not me, I don't feel like being chastised or held up because the system in place. What we need to do is make sure those failing schools, you do get good teachers in there, and that they're not somehow punished on an evaluation form at the end of the year, that they're given credit for taking on the challenges. The toughest schools require the best teachers in many respects, and I'm concerned about some of the proposals where you're just going to rate the school's performance, and that will also rate the teacher performance, and I think that's a recipe for disaster.
What do you think?
I think that there are, what we've learned is there are different ways of thinking and there are different ways of learning. And tests are a one-size-fits-all approach. And we've seen that, not just in studies as it relates to MCAS, but all standardized tests. And so it's interesting, every year when you see test scores and results, the best communities that have the most amount of money, they're the ones that do better on exams. And the question is, why is that? Why do some areas perform better than others? Why do some students struggle more than others? And I think we need to be as innovative as possible to tapping into the different ways that people learn and make sure that we can measure that. And I think that we've learned over time that MCAS is one way to do that, and we want to capture that, but we've got to think of other ways. There have been books and studies done about emotional intelligence and what impact that could have on the success of somebody in society as it relates to their profession. Well, that's something that we could look at. Is that something that we can measure for them? There may be people that have other abilities that may not be related to the math and science or what the test is doing. How do we measure that and make sure that we're harnessing and showing kids that have strengths in some areas that they have a future and that they have an opportunity, so they don't feel like they're totally let down just because they can't achieve the test result. At the end of the day, some people do think differently. Some people do learn differently, and we need to be innovative. That's where the future's going to be. If we're going to move forward as a society and get people to be entrepreneurial, to have people feel like they can create their own destinies, they have to feel that their strengths matter. And the MCAS is one way to measure it. We need that standard, but we need to encourage these other students that we're trying to bring along and say, look, there's a place for you too. Just because you can't pass the MCAS doesn't mean it's over for you at the age of 17 or 18. There's a future for you. And there's a way and a roadmap to do that. And so we need to bring the best and brightest together and say, how do we do this and how do we capture it? And I'll just say, look, I remember when I was in school, what I remember in terms of my education isn't the test. That's not what impacted me. It was the teacher that inspired me. It was the teacher in the classroom that made me feel important, that awoken what your sensibilities are, your values are. And you can't always measure that in an MCAS exam. I mean, I think if you or anybody listening, thinking back, they don't remember what it was like the day. I didn't take the MCAS, but the Iowa test. Most people aren't thinking back to that was an enjoyable day or something in their educational career that they felt changed their life or motivated them or pushed them in a direction. That comes from the inspiration from the teacher and the interaction.
But you could have still been inspired by a bad teacher.
Oh,
the teacher,
well,
you didn't know that
been,
teacher was
the
teaching
negative
you anything.
inspired, yeah.
So,
Correct.
But that's interesting. Good. Well, I can see whoever is elected in this district, I'm going to be writing some nice editorials. But let's move on. And the intriguing thing about the both of you, you're both attorneys, a prosecutor and a defense attorney, a family attorney, a civil law attorney. And what hasn't come up in this debate is how you view the court system. Okay, even though you're on both sides of the fence. My question: has the legislature failed the judicial system in this state, not funding it, or is the judicial system not living up to its goal to be more efficient? Eileen?
Well, the trial court has sustained huge cuts by the legislature year after year. I was talking to someone the other day, and in the past 2 years they're down, I think, 800 employees from attrition, from hiring freeze. Yet at the same time, the demand and for the courts has risen, partly because of the economy, partly because of, just the situation that we're in. I think the trial court is facing tremendous challenges and burdens. Has the legislature failed them? Yeah, I think, we want justice, swiftly, and if people have issues. The cuts that the court is proposing now, I mean, it's devastating, for people who, need to use the courts. And you bring up a point. I mean, I have a general practice. I practice civil law, I practice criminal law, and family law. And, the waits are longer to get even the most, minimal type of thing addressed. The judges are working hard. The trial court personnel are burdened. And again, it's statistics. Look at the number of cases. Look at the drastic increase in the load of work that the trial courts are taking on, and look at the decline in people to do it. Now, why that is, I don't know. You hear all the explanations. Sometimes it's that there's no constituency, for the, people only care if they have a case in the court, and other than that, there's no vociferous constituency that is calling their legislator to say, hey, make sure you fund the trial court. But it is a core of our system. I mean, our justice system is, and I said it last night, I'll say it again, it's the best in the world. And the only way it works is to make sure that the courts have the tools that they need to deal with the controversies that come before them. If it's a civil issue, if it's a fight between a neighbor over a property boundary, if it's a criminal matter, the courts have to have those tools, because it all goes to the society we live in and the quality of life out there. So, I think they have failed the trial court.
It's a combination of both, I think. I mean, I think, being somebody that helped run the largest law office in New England, criminal law office in New England, with 250 employees, 40,000 criminal cases a year, somebody who oversaw innovative programs, somebody who has actually drafted legislation that impacts public safety, and actually knows what it's like to have to lay somebody off because of budget cuts. I think I have a pretty good perspective on this. I think, this is the challenge we face right now in government. There's dwindling revenue, and everyone's getting cut. You're seeing DA's offices getting cut. You're seeing the courts getting cuts. But at the same time, you're seeing schools getting cut because there's no money. And so it's one thing to say they're not being deserving of it, but everybody is suffering. The reality in the criminal justice system is this. I mean, you look in this area, the district court alone has 10,000 cases at Lowell District Court a year, over 10,000. That's a lot of cases. That's a lot of cases. And if you do the number, I can tell you how many cases a DA is holding at one time, 300 cases. Probation officers are holding 300 to 400 cases at one time, managing a very large caseload of challenging and difficult cases that are not easily handled. And so it's two things. There's always inefficiencies, and that's what we have to make sure that we're doing our very best to identify them and to root them out and to say, hey, look, where can we have cost savings and where should we be deploying them? And I do agree strongly that the reason that you have some of the challenges with the court system is the constituency issue. I think that's a big part of it. At the end of the day, the general public, when they think of law enforcement, public safety, they automatically think of police officers and firefighters, and they do a very good job communicating their message. As you get higher up the chain and you start talking about, getting into the court system, I think, it's not as well known or understood.
Well, I am very shocked that slightly more than 50% of the state legislature has law degrees, okay, and yet they have given the court less and less funding over the last several years, and yet they all stick up for the independence of the judicial system.
Yeah.
Then they don't put their words into action. And I just look at some of the issues that are facing the courts, and that you have some courts that, like Lowell, that are overused, and then you've got some down in the Boston area that are underutilized, and yet they have more people on the payroll and stuff. So I think that's a problem that has to be addressed.
Sure.
And I hope either one of you would have the
yeah, I mean, there has to be some, balance in terms of, how many people are assigned to a particular courthouse and what's the caseload, and that has to be addressed. But, in addition to the backload and the wait for criminal cases, try civil. You know, you talk to people who have a civil case, and this is the problem. They're isolated. They're people who don't, you know, go to the courts every day, and they'll say, well, how long is it going to take us to get into court or get a trial date? Now, I mean, it always took a while. It's taking longer and longer, and it's a serious matter for a particular individual, but it affects only them, and that's where the constituency part comes from. And so, you know, the legislature who has to make cuts, you know, again, they're not an organized group. They're just people who are randomly affected by these cuts, and so they can do it and not face a hue and cry or people marching on the State House for the 5 o'clock news.
Okay, we have teachers who have to be certified. We have firefighters and police who have to get retraining. Even to shoot a gun, a police officer has to be recertified every year or two. Okay? And yet for judges, once they get on the bench, they can serve to a mandatory retirement age at 70. Should we have some mechanism where judges go for a review, maybe after 10 years, 5 years? But why should judges get a pass when all other professionals in government, it seems that the trend is to get recertified what do you think about that, Chris?
I think it's an interesting question. I mean, I think, you know, one, we're talking about an issue of balance of power, and so would the question be the judiciary branch would monitor itself? Is that the question?
Well, should there be some review process where they have to reapply for their job over a certain amount of years? And I'll just throw 10 years. I mean, I think that's pretty fair.
Yeah.
Should judges have to go through the same accountability and performance measures that we ask other people to do?
Yeah. Well, I think that having some level of review is important. I mean, being a prosecutor who's been in court every single day, dealing with different judges, I think it can be helpful on one end to make sure that there's some consistency to try to balance out what decisions are being made in a way that's equitable. I mean, that's why there's a lot of talk about minimum mandatory sentences, and we pass laws as it relates to, you know, certain results as it relates to a sentence and punishment, talking on the criminal side. But I think having some review there is important on both sides. I think it's good for the judge to get some feedback, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're maintaining the independence of the judge, that they feel like they can make decisions that they're free to make them, to make sure that, you know, they're doing things because they think it's in the interest of justice and not necessarily because they think it's going to be a review performance. I think having some feedback there is important, but how we would do it, we would have to talk about it, and I think it would have to come through the judicial branch. I mean, there is a process, an informal process in place right now through the trial court, that if you have an issue with a judge, that you could raise it with them and they could speak with them. I think maybe we could have a better process with that, so everybody...
It's not very transparent.
And then, yeah, that may be the case.
What do you think? Should we have a review of maybe every 10 years?
Here's the problem. I mean, you know, a lot of jurisdictions elect judges, you know, and there's a whole, you know, thought process about that. Makes them political, makes them responsive to, you know, people who maybe otherwise, if they were really being independent, they wouldn't, you know, they're going to shy away from making tough decisions. Judges make tough decisions all the time, and I think the system that we have here is a good one. It removes them from political influence and constituencies, and they're going to do what they think is right. They have to be, you know, they go through a rigorous examination in order to get appointed in the first place. And so, you know, my experience over 30 years working in all of the courts in the Commonwealth, I've seen very few judges who don't belong there. Most of them do a darn good job. They really do. Most of them have been vetted, you know, to the max in order to get appointed there. I know we hear stories about, you know, this one wasn't competent, this one made a contribution to someone, but in reality, the process is rigorous to get appointed. I think the other concern I would have as far as reapply or review is now all of a sudden, you know, if you made a harsh decision, let's say it was against somebody who's pretty powerful or pretty influential, now what happens? Are those people going to come down and, you know, take your job away from you? That's the whole point of having the judiciary independent. You know, we do have a process where you can complain about a judge, where it will be addressed, and I think that has worked. Again, out of the number of judges, we've seen very, very few that have either stepped over the line or have gotten out of line. And when they have, I think they've been dealt with pretty harshly by the judiciary. It's tough. I mean, it's a tough thing to say, how do you police yourself? But I think the judiciary has done, in this state, has done a pretty good job of it. Because I don't think you could put it up to let the legislature decide. Who are we going to have decide? Let the litigants who came before them, are they the ones who are going to decide, in terms of giving their review? That's where the devil's in the details. So, whether it should be mandatory in terms of the judiciary itself, that's probably not a bad idea. But again, I think you have to maintain that independence. You see every single day when a judge takes the bench, they're dealing with people's lives every day. I don't care if it's a civil case, a criminal case, a divorce case. I mean, they're dealing with people's lives, with their families, with their children. It's a tough job. And if they're going to suffer the slings and arrows of someone's going to walk out that door not happy. And so I think that the emphasis has to be on the front end. Who are you putting on the bench? And right now, as I said, there's a process that a whole group of people, not political, vet the judge. They are looked, or the applicant, or what have you, and making sure that is as rigorous as possible, I think is where we should put our emphasis, so that you're putting the right people there.
Can you follow up quickly?
I mean, it's a tough job. I mean, it's a job where you're making a hard decision each and every day. I mean, that's what judges are confronted with. And you're making decisions that impact people's lives, and there is a reaction to it. I mean, there's no question about it. Now, sometimes we see the cases on the front page of the news where people may be upset about a certain sentence. That's why I favor what they call presumptive sentencing. And that is when judges make decisions, they can write their decisions out and say, look, the presumption is that this is what a sentence would be, and we're talking on the criminal side, but a presumption would be the sentence would be in this guideline. And then if they go outside that, they need to write their reasons and give a basis for that. And that way, there's a public record to say, hey, why exactly did the judge do that? I think presumptive sentencing is a good way to go about approaching some of these issues.
Quickly, are you in favor of the new Corey law that was just passed, where basically now, I think it goes back, it wipes out a record if someone's been clean for felony for 10 years. If they've been clean for 10 years, basically an employer would have to go through a process to find out anything about this person, even pay to get that information.
I would not have supported the Corey reform bill. I think that we needed to have some change to make sure that we are trying to get people back to work who deserve to get back to work. But I think what happens is with this Corey bill, it's a catch-all on a timeline for felonies and misdemeanors. And quite frankly, I think there are some felonies that should stay on the record. I think there are some misdemeanors that could come off sooner than what's reported. What I would have liked to have seen is more of a case-by-case basis in terms of what the crime is, how it relates to the job that they would be going for, and address it in that way. I think when you have a catch-all, in some cases, you'd have somebody that had a felony, and they'd be on the timeline, and you know what? The employer should still have a right to have
Wouldn't
that.
that system create just more bureaucracy and charges a favorite?
Well, no, I think not if you do it the right way, not if you go in terms of by crime category. Because you got to think about it. Sometimes somebody may be charged with a crime, and the charges may be lessened. And so for example, I'll give you an assault and battery. Well, an assault and battery could be a misdemeanor in this case, and so they may be exempted, but it could have been a harsher crime that was negotiated down. To have a catch-all, you may have crime types that are falling under this law that could have an impact on employees. They may want to know. But on the back end of that, there are some things that I don't think, we could do a better job of making sure that the person doesn't have to disclose it even shorter than 5 years. I mean, there are some crimes that just don't relate.
I mean, I think, in principle, I support the Corey reform because, you see every day that people who had either a minor, matter, and when I say minor, sometimes on paper it looks like a serious matter, but you go behind the facts and it wasn't. And they may have been young, and they may have been foolish, and they may have gone into court and maybe not even had counsel, and they worked out a plea agreement, because that happens in probably 95% of the cases. They're worked out by a plea agreement. And then the lasting impact on their record, I can't tell you how many times people have no idea what that means. It's a way of processing a case quickly in a very busy court. We'll work out a deal here with you today. You don't go to jail, you pay a fine. We'll just put this on your record, and off you go. And years later, you're paying the price. So in principle, I certainly agree with this. As far as any very, very serious kind of felony, so felony can be, there are countless offenses that fall into the felony category that, when you look at the facts, were not serious. They just didn't get bled down. They didn't get broken down because whatever the luck of the draw, the day they went into court, they represented themselves, or whoever was handling their case didn't want to break it down, and they just wanted to get rid of it for the same disposition if it had been broken down. So there's a lot that goes into those decisions, but 10 years later, you're just looking at a piece of paper with a record, with a conviction, and that's going to prevent you from doing a lot of things with your life. And you can't get a do-over. You know, you can't go back and say, gee, I wish, I mean, as much as people try and you think you go back and you vacate a sentence, it's not easily done. It's rare that it happens.
There are 700 foreclosures just in Lowell. But across this district that you're running in, there are close to 1,000 homes that have been foreclosed upon since 2007. Despite all the efforts of all the stimulus plans and everything, this has still been a drag on the economy, and especially the local economy. Any thoughts, any ideas about how to jumpstart the market and get it back on track to probably alleviate some of these issues? And the Sun just wrote a story that these foreclosures, no matter where they occur, whether in the suburbs or in Lowell, at the time they start creating problems for property values for homes in those same neighborhoods.
Sure.
So it is almost like people is having the perception that's a failed neighborhood.
Sure.
Which is so. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, someone who's living in downtown Lowell who's seen foreclosures, on the street that I live on, I mean, it definitely has an impact on property values. And I think everybody in this district who knows somebody who has had a foreclosure or lives near somebody that has had a foreclosure. I think the heart of what we're talking about, comes down to liquidity in a market and banks' ability to be flexible in these types of decisions, and local banks being able to make decisions to try to help some people. In my economic plan, I've talked about bringing banks together and trying to give them some resources so they can loan some money for small businesses. But I think that we could work with them to try to identify and help some of these people who are underwater to get them on track. There's a federal stimulus plan that was intended to try to help some people, and people right now are going through a process of trying to have loan modifications, but it's very tough. It's still very tough for people to get a loan modification under the rules and guidelines. If there are ways we can do that we should do it. And I think, we're not going to get out of this problem until we start getting people back to work. At the end of the day, that's the heart of the problem. If people don't have jobs, they're not going to be able to pay their mortgages. And so that's why I've called in my economic plan trying to jumpstart this economy by helping small businesses start. And by doing that, what we say is all of the fees that the state charges you, you won't have to pay up front. You can pay that at the end of 1 year. That way we reduce the amount of money you have to put going in. Hopefully that will get small businesses started so they can get some revenue and start to pay for their homes. It's why I've called on accelerating depreciation write-off costs for those small businesses in their first year to give them some relief, so when they start a business, it's easier for them and they can start to make some revenue so they can pay off their homes and values. And trying to get back to work, I mean, that's the key of what we're talking about here. But until we do that, we're not going to be able to get back on track.
I think there are two problems with the foreclosure mess that we're in. The pendulum went from no documentation loan. You don't have to tell us what you make, what your bills are. We're going to give you the loan. In the early and mid 2000s. No matter who you are, here you go. Here's your loan. To no matter how much money you make, we're not going to refinance your loan. And that's the problem people are getting caught in this down economy. There are people today who want to refinance their loan, but the banks won't do it. The rates are at a record low, 4%. They're paying 8, 9, 10%. In a bad economy, if they could refinance with their same bank or another, they could easily afford their mortgage. But because one or the other has lost a job, they need that relief. The banks aren't refinancing for a number of reasons, but the main reason, well, your property value has dropped, so we're not going to give you the loan. Even though their mortgage payment, which they can show and demonstrate that they've been making all these years, will go down. And they can guarantee that they'll be able to make, because their credit is good. They won't do it. They force people into foreclosure. And that is a decision made at the bank level. They're adhering to these appraisals and so forth. Then when they make a loan, they decide to, at the last minute, make the borrowers jump through hoops and sometimes have called off loans on the day of a closing. That's a huge problem with banks, and I think we need to look at that and make sure banks are treating people fairly. They're forcing people into foreclosure. The other problem, and I saw this, knocking doors this summer, and just even right here in Lowell, out in Pawtuckettville one night, knocking doors, and one of the issues that people had in the street was this house. Very lovely neighborhood. Everybody was taking care of their property, but there were 2 homes on the street that had been foreclosed by the bank 2 years ago. They're boarded up. They're a mess. They don't cut the lawn. It's drawing down the value of the property. Within a half hour, there were every neighbor came out on the street saying, look at what's happened here. They have tried and tried. They have vagrants going in there. This isn't a nice neighborhood. They are worried about fires in this because, people will go in and start this. And they have called the banks. The banks foreclosed. The bank owns the property. It's some bank out in Texas who has never seen this property.
But should
they
local
can't
government be doing something?
Local government goes out and sites and tries to board and make sure that the property's boarded up. But it is a morass. And so this is on some balance sheet of a bank in Texas. But it's taking down this neighborhood in Pawtuckettville. And it's causing a real heartache for the people who sit and look at it every day. The neighbor said to me, I've been cutting the lawn all summer because it looks like a haunted house. And he said, I nail up the boards on the windows, and they take them down at night, and they go in there, and they say, we looked and, there was one board down. There's mattresses and things. They don't know who's doing this, but that is another problem. We should not allow these banks, I don't care if they're local, I don't care if they're from Texas or California, to foreclose on property and then just mothball them and cause a blight on a neighborhood that's unfair, and I think there has to be legislation that will address that issue.
You think there should be legislation to address that?
Well, I think that, but I also think, local community needs to step up and make sure they're responding as well to try to put pressure on these banks. I think a couple of things. One, residents have seen their property taxes nearly double, and the Boston Globe did a front page story about this. And now what you see happening is home values continue to decline, but the property taxes aren't going down commensurate with those rates. And there was improper planning along the way when people are raising taxes, and now here people are forcing them more into foreclosure because they're not just paying their mortgages, their taxes are higher than they've ever been. The second thing is, if you want to refinance now, it's almost impossible because what's happened is your property value has gone down so much. You have to put in so much money if you want to refinance. So the only people who are able to get an opportunity to refinance are the people who are in good position, either have their loan brought down 20% of the value of the house or have the amount of money to bring them to that level so they can refinance. So it's a significant problem and a challenge. I mean, I think at the end of the day, legislation might be something, but I think a community's got to step up too and say, hey, look, at the end of the day, let's get on the phone. Let's find out why this bank isn't doing this. If we've got a neighborhood and there's a home blight, and I know the home you're talking about, you can smell the home because there was flooding in that neighborhood. And so the waters were seeping through that house, and it's all mildew. And so you can literally smell the home from a block away if it's the one in Pawtuckettville.
I think it's another one.
It might be another one.
I think that's one.
But you can literally smell the house, and everybody in the neighborhood is talking about it because they said the home stinks, and it's not boarded up properly, the grass is high, all that's true. I mean, we've got to compel. Legislation's one way, but I think everybody's got to get their hands
But
around
what happens is the local community does, and they have in the past, tried to contact, and it just falls on deaf ears. I mean, you try and get, call Bank of America sometime.
Yep.
They don't even call you back. You just get put into this cycle of voicemails. And so they do, and they try, and they cite, they will go out and they will cite them for not keeping up minimum maintenance of the property. But, all that happens is the citation gets put on the record, they get fined, and it just goes on, they'll collect if and when the property ever gets sold. These banks are not paying attention. They're not being, required, and they don't care if the city of Lowell calls them and says, we're going to, lodge a fine against you every day. Good, do it. That's the problem, and they're allowed to sit on these forever. Now, why aren't they selling the property? Just sell it. They don't do anything with it. So there should be a requirement that they have to, if they foreclose, they have to do something with the property within a reasonable period of time. And they're not doing it. And they just are taking on so many properties that they're not doing it. We talk about affordable housing. If some of these properties, they're just going down in value, not just because of what's happening in the market, but because of the conditions. If there was an opportunity to, auction these off for affordable, a lot of young families, could afford, even if it's a fixer-upper, put someone in there as an affordable housing unit. I mean, these are the kinds of innovative things we have to do in this economy, so that people, rents are at record high. A young family's paying $1,200 a month in rent. Let's set up a first-time home buyer affordable housing. Let's see if we can get some kind of incentive for these people to start moving these properties, putting families in, because that's what's going to strengthen the neighborhoods.
Okay, we're running out of time, and we're going to go a little over, so I don't think you people have any appointments for the next 10 minutes, do you? Do you have to go someplace in the next 10 minutes? Because I have to ask this about the follow-up to last night. There were charges of distortions made about each other's campaigns, so I just want to, after both of you have had reason to think about last night and the repartee that went back and forth over this, I want to ask you, do you believe that Eileen made charges that you have distorted her record? Okay, do you think you have distorted her record?
Absolutely not. Everything that we have talked about in this race, from raising the pay, is documented, and we've provided the city council minutes relative to that. When we talk about increasing the budget and increased taxes, that is all factual information that we have provided. When we talk about the cases and the representation, we've provided those documents to this newspaper about those cases and had conversations, as well as the comments that have been made about public safety. It's not distortion. At the end of the day, it's facts. That's what campaigns are about. They're about talking about the issues and talking about past records. Every campaign does that. Now, I had said this last night, in a challenge against Nikki Tsongas. Nikki Tsongas had said to Eileen, hey, at the end of the day, she felt like you were distorting her record, and you said you were raising the facts. I'm doing the same exact thing. Everything we talk about is documented, and it's real. It's not a distortion at the end of the day. Now, I know that it's hard when it's your record, and you may not like what the challenge is, or you may not like what's being revealed, but at the end of the day, it's facts, and that's what we do in campaign. The same way in my race, the same way for me, Jim, where it's been said that I haven't been given any service to this community. I think that's an outrage. And I will match my qualifications and credentials to anybody. I'm somebody that has helped run one of the largest public law offices in New England, one that's widely respected by independent organizations, one that has 250 employees, one that prosecutes 40,000 cases a year. I've actually written legislation that's become law at the state level. I'm going to put my qualifications up to anybody, including a city councilor who goes to a meeting one day a week. If you don't want to take a case, you don't have to. But if you want to be a defense attorney, that's okay. Take any case you want. But don't, on the other end, go out as a public servant and take all these hard stances saying something contrary to that. And I'll talk specifically about it, in my opinion. And, I'll do a comparison to Mitt Romney in what he talked about with jobs. I don't think that you can claim that you're a public safety candidate, that you're fighting to keep the streets safe from crime, when on the back end you're going in and defending the largest drug case in the history of Massachusetts. I don't think that's right. I don't think you can do that. It's no different than when Mitt Romney said that he was creating jobs, but then on the back end we found out he was actually cutting jobs.
Okay, well, that was Mitt Romney.
Yeah, but I'm just saying in comparison.
Eileen?
Chris, you can talk all you want. You run a negative campaign from day one. That's all you've done. You run a negative campaign. You somehow think this is a new and innovative way of campaigning. It's as old as the hills. There's nothing new. There's nothing fresh about it.
This is your campaign against the Tsongas campaign you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about you, Chris. Okay.
Let her have a chance to respond.
And for you to suggest and question my service. And by the way, you talk about service. That was your job. That was your job that you took a paycheck.
And I made a decision to do that.
And that's fine.
The same way you made a decision to defend the people that you defend.
No. Let me finish, because I didn't interrupt you when you were on your rant of, misrepresentations, and I expect the same, courtesy from you. So, the fact is this. For you to go back 20 years and say, hey, she represented this person, a case that you know full well was plea bargained, that I was court appointed.
It's a felony case.
But Chris, I'm a lawyer. Do you understand? That's my job. And 20 years ago, I represent a young woman. We enter a plea agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office, who agrees to the terms, with Judge Harrington, who gave what he thought was a fair sentence. And for you to say, well, that somehow is contrary to what you're saying today, is ridiculous. It's a juvenile position. The same with your rant about my criminal defense work, which, by the way, is a slim portion of my legal career. Very slim. But I do it as a Criminal Justice Act board member in the federal court. And because I speak Spanish, you know all this, that I'm appointed to represent people. And I'm appointed because I speak Spanish, because these folks can't afford their attorney, their own attorney, and they also can't speak with an attorney. And I do that as a service, and I'm proud to have done that. I give the best representation I can. The people I am representing are not the kingpins, and you know that. You know that they're the small fries, and you know how, because you of all people should understand how the criminal justice system works.
Would you
And
defend the kingpin if he came into your office?
I never did, Jim. And that, the point is this: I represent people to the best of my ability, okay? And I'm not going to say, and for you to suggest that we shouldn't do that is absurd, all right? And then secondly, for you to say that somehow informs my criminal justice position.
Sure.
Because I worked very hard in the city of Lowell. I chaired public safety. I worked with the police department. I supported all the initiatives that the police department brought forward. We added 100 police officers to the street. Okay? We dropped crime by 60%. Are you listening, or are you just going to try?
I'm listening to you.
Okay.
You
Because
brought
I'm
police
trying.
officers,
Yeah.
but I also want to just get my information to ask you some questions. That's okay.
Okay, wait.
Well, you know what?
I put the question out. Unfortunately.
Well, let me just finish. Let me just wrap up. I started Future Stars Camp together with Judge Wolf from the federal court, together with the police department, that gave hundreds of young people in the city a place to go for mentoring, for summer camp. That's made a huge difference. I started a mentoring program with the business community. I initiated a gang summit that we held at Middlesex Community College. I worked hand in hand. You can talk to anyone. Ask Ed Davis whether I was a good public safety partner, okay? That's what I'm talking about, service. For you to try and distort that fact that I did my job as a lawyer, I spent 31 years building my reputation as an attorney. Right? I will not have you cast aspersion on my service as an attorney. And at the same time, I gave back to this community on a daily basis, not just as an elected official, but I didn't see you at any time. I didn't see you at any time offer your service to the city when we were in great straits at all. I didn't see you volunteering to do anything with the youth of the city. You never came to a public safety subcommittee if you were so concerned about what was happening. Where were you, Chris? Where were you?
I was in college probably when you started
Okay.
that. That would be the first thing.
Right.
The second thing I would say is I was in the courts putting away the drug dealers in this community.
Yeah.
That's what I was doing. And for you to say you were involved in petty cases, I'm looking at the press release from the U.S. Attorney's Office, where largest ever cocaine seizure in Massachusetts history.
Yeah, and
$23 million.
how
That's
many
not a
defendants?
kingpin.
How many defendants?
21 defendants.
That's right.
And Wilfredo Perez is up there.
And he pled guilty.
That's
Well,
correct.
Chris, I would suggest if you want to disseminate that, you should put that up on your website.
Sure.
If that's what you want to do. But another point, going back to this issue, I received, and I want to thank both of you for sending your flyers to my home, okay? But you did send one out recently, okay, that had all, I think you made the message about the lobbyists and the puppets. And one of those caricatures looked like me, I thought. But anyway, you did have a line in there saying that this is not a coronation. And you made it seem like it was a Lowell Sun headline. Now I remember the quote, because when we did the story, you said in the original story when you decided to run, this is not a coronation, it's going to be a competition.
Correct.
You said it's a competition of ideas. But yet in that flyer, there were the words, this is not a coronation, Lowell Sun.
Sure.
I mean, it made it seem like it was a headline of the Lowell Sun.
Well, it was the headline in the Lowell Sun. That was the headline of the column. And so that's what we had pulled.
Okay, it was not a direct quote from the Lowell Sun.
Well,
It never appeared in an editorial.
Well, a couple of things what I'll say is we took the headline from the column and we cut and pasted, and that's the actual headline that was in the Lowell Sun column. The second thing I will say is from the beginning of this campaign, Jim, I have been, in that article it said Chris Doherty was biting off more than he could chew in the Lowell Sun. And there were a lot of comments about, me and in that vein. At the end of the day, quite frankly, I think that it should be about a competition and not a coronation. And quite frankly, a lot of people were upset with the fact that I was challenging the status quo in the city.
Who was?
The newspaper, for one. I mean, when the newspaper says that I'm biting off more than I could chew, I think that says something about the status quo. I received a lot of calls from people saying, you know, why do you want to do that? Just let this go the way it should go. But I think at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is factual, okay? It's factual. And what the message was in that was about the lobbyists, that my opponent continues to deny. She says they're not a lobbyist firm, and this is the record right here that shows clearly Liberty Square Group is a lobbying firm
Chris,
with Scott
will
Ferguson.
you at least try and tell the truth?
I let you talk.
All right, 30 seconds, get it out there, because we've been over this.
This is the lobbyist search right here, and so what is it about this that's not truthful?
It's not true.
Why? What's not true?
Scott Ferguson and counter units are not registered lobbyists. They're the ones.
What is this then? What does this say? Lobbyist public search. Liberty Square Group.
Where does it say Scott Ferguson and counter units are registered lobbyists? Where does it say it?
It says right there that
Here's
Scott
the truth.
Ferguson is the president of the firm.
Here's the truth. You
Okay.
know he's not a registered lobbyist, yet you keep saying it. But this is your game, and that's your shtick. And go ahead, keep saying it. It's not true. The more you say it, doesn't make it any
Well,
truer.
it is truthful, and at the end of the day, that's what this is about, Jim. People,
Okay,
if I
but
get the
over-
opportunity to respond, though, Jim, she had a long opportunity to talk about these issues. At the end of the day, we're talking about politicians who say one thing and do another. I understand that it's hard sometimes to be challenged on your record because you either don't like it or you don't think it benefits your interest, but this is fact. This is fact, and that's what we're raising in this race, and this is a clear difference in this race. The people who are in the
But Chris,
community...
yes, I agree with you, you're raising facts, but I wonder, you know, if I have some problems sometimes with the going back 20 years with it. I've done things 20 years ago.
I provided you with cases as recently as a couple of years ago, and you didn't want to
You've raised those races.
Not all of them.
Because
I
I
didn't talk
question
about the Whitey Bulge, the defense of Whitey Bulge's
because this newspaper has sworn to be fair to both candidates.
Sure.
Okay, and I think the relevancy, every editor across the country can be proved. Can you say yes or wrong, that we've done a good job, a bad job? I can be accused of making mistakes, but I have to decide how
to
relevancy.
suggest that these cases are just 20 years ago, to suggest you just did
No,
a
but
couple,
the
there's over
relevancy.
100 cases in federal court.
This is not my debate.
I have represented hundreds and
And that's
hundreds of
okay.
cases.
And that's okay.
That's my job, Chris.
And that's
you
okay.
know
I want to
it.
just bring this
It's
back on
silly.
track
It's
because,
silly.
And that's okay,
let's
but you
just
can't
let's
say
just
that
put
you-
this let's just get this back on track because I
And
think
by the way, you don't think a city councilor deserves $15,000 a year? Why don't you go out and tell every city councilor that? Because they
Well,
work very hard.
What
They
I'll
work
tell you is
very
this,
hard.
at a time, well, first of all, that was based on, you had said at the first debate that you didn't support pay raises.
No. Let's be accurate. I was asked, would I support a pay raise if I was elected to the Senate? And I said, today, now, in this economy, no.
That's not what you said, and I'll provide the quote.
Oh.
But I would also say is this, in this economy, at the time you voted for your pay raise, do you know that the city of Lowell was not meeting its minimum
That's
foundational
not
spending
true.
for schools?
It's not true.
I'll
Here
give
you
you the
go.
Department of
Yeah,
Revenue. I mean,
yes.
the strategy, Eileen, can be just to deny
Listen.
everything, and I know that that's your profession.
It's not,
You think that that's what you do.
no.
But
And
at
you
the end
know
of the day,
what?
it's factual.
But let's get the facts out. In 1940s, a city council made $4,000. It was raised to $7,500 in 1980.
Yeah.
Okay, almost 40 years later. It was raised, and it stayed at that figure from 1980 until 1999, almost 20 years.
Yeah.
When there was a unanimous vote to raise it to $15,000, not for that council, but for the council coming in after that. You know those facts, but, you know, and yet you sit here and act as though...
It's okay, you can defend the pay raise, and that's fine, and we can
I'm
respectfully
setting the
disagree on
record
it.
straight, that's all,
Okay.
because it seems to be something you're not capable of doing, but, you know.
I think I think you people have both given a pretty good accounting of where you stand on some of these issues. I mean, on the issues of governance, I think you have a lot more in common than most people think. It's where you diverge on the way both campaigns have been run, and I think some of the facts that have been raised and how they've been used. And I think that's where the people are going to have to decide what separates the both of you and where they go. But as promised earlier, we're going to give both of you 90 seconds to cut into your 2 minutes. So why don't we both look into the camera and just tell the people of the district, the 1st Middlesex District, why they should vote for you on Tuesday, September 14th. And I don't know, would anybody prefer to go first at all?
Doesn't matter.
Okay, why don't you go out?
Thank you. Jim, thank you, and thank you to the Lowell Sun for giving me a chance to come here in the waning days before this campaign to ask you for your vote, which I ask you most respectfully. Look, you know, we've heard a lot throughout this campaign, and I have said, and I'll say again here, I think the campaign reflects the candidate. I think what we need right now, the issues that we're facing are very, very serious. And this is not time for games or distortions or misrepresentations. You know, a campaign that tries to ridicule the opponent by putting out cartoon characters and photoshopping crowns on their head, this sounds more like, you know, junior high hijinks than dealing with the serious issues that a state senator has to do. That's the difference. I stated at the beginning of this race I was going to run a positive issues campaign, and that's what I've done. I have been subject to onslaught almost on a daily basis from my opponent, and that's what he's chosen to do. You be the judge. Who has the maturity, the experience, and the commitment to this community and to the communities of the 1st Middlesex District to be the next state senator? I respectfully ask that you judge me not only on my record, but on who I am and what I've done and how I've conducted myself. The best way to judge what someone will do in the future is what they've done in the past. And so with that said, I ask for your support and your vote on September 14th. Thank you.
You know, I started this race 6 months ago, and I gave up my job as a prosecutor in the Middlesex District Attorney's Office because I believed we needed a different direction, and I believed we needed some honesty in government. And what we set out to do was to run an aggressive campaign. And I agree with my opponent that the best indicator of how you will perform in the future is how you've performed in the past. So let's talk about what I've done in this campaign. I've personally knocked on 10,000 doors. I've gone to countless events. I have talked to hundreds and hundreds of people about the issues that matter to them. And I haven't just listened to the concerns. I've come up with concrete plans on how to address these problems. We've put out a plan on the economy. We've put out a plan on green jobs. We've talked about ways to reform Beacon Hill and steps specifically that we could take to do that. We put out a plan on senior property tax relief, and we put out a plan on the environment. I'm the only candidate in this race that's put out any comprehensive plans. These times are too serious to fly by the seat of our pants. This is a time when we need concrete plans and solutions to move forward, and that's what we're going to do. I have worked extremely hard every single day, 7 days a week, full time, in order to earn your vote and your support. And that's the type of representation I'm going to be as a state senator. I'm going to fight issues that I think are important. I'm going to stand up when I think that there's inconsistencies in somebody's record. And I'm going to fight the corruption on Beacon Hill. That's what this race is about. That's what this race is about on September 14th. And you have a choice on Election Day. We can move forward with new energy, new ideas, and that's what I seek to bring in this race. I hope to get your support.
He is Chris Doherty. She is Eileen Donoghue. The choice is up to you. But I do want to thank you for watching, and I tell you, I want to thank both candidates. They've had a long grind here for 6 months. I think both of them have been enjoyed meeting the voters out there and doing their jobs. And you deserve, they deserve you to go out there on Tuesday and vote in this election. I think you'll be well served by either one of these candidates, but it's up to you to decide. Make sure you look at the Sun tomorrow. We will have our final endorsements for the state senate races, and follow our coverage right up until Wednesday morning when the final ballots will be decided, and we'll post all the stories in the Sun. Thank you very much.